Yeah.
Seems good.
Recording.
And Nora, I don't know, can you pin me? I don't have, on my phone, it's hard to
No problem.
see all the functionality on Zoom.
So we have Jamie, Judy, and Lucy all pinned, and I will control the chat.
Great, and I won't be able to see it because I'm on my phone, and anyway, I think we can probably start.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, it's going to be a little bit awkward for me, but whatever, that's showbiz.
It's showbiz. Okay. Do we want to go ahead?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. Cool. So it looks like everyone who's in the waiting room is in now. So Lucy, do you want me to just start and do some housekeeping stuff?
Sure.
Okay. So hi, everyone. My name is Nora. I'm here on behalf of Insight Collaborations International. Thank you so much for coming. We have about 40 people signed up for this event, so that's really awesome and exciting. And because there are so many people, we are going to ask that you ask questions in the chat. So I'm going to be the one reading the chat, and I will relay when there is a question. And the session is being recorded as well. And Lucy will be our host and introduce our speakers and kind of guide the conversation from there. But if anyone has any questions before we get started, now would be a great time. So, cool. Okay, take it away, Lucy.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy Rosa. I'm the Executive Director of the Sargent Shriver Peace Institute, and I'm also a member of Inside Collaborations International. I ask for your patience as we go through this. My internet died just 5 minutes ago, so I'm on my phone, and hopefully my cellular data will stay up for the next 90 minutes or so. So I'd like to thank you for joining us. We'll be discussing the latest book by Jamie Price, The Call, The Spiritual Realism of Sargent Shriver. And as I make my opening remarks, I invite you to enter your name and location in the chat so that we can start to get to know each other a little bit. You can see the chat button in the bottom of your screen, hopefully on Zoom. And once you turn it on, the chat window is usually on the right side if you're on a computer. And one technical note, I ask you to stay muted throughout the conversation so that we don't have a lot of external noise coming in. We're pleased to be able to be having this conversation at this particular time because March is an important month for the Peace Corps and for Peace Corps history. On March 1st, 1961, President John F. Kennedy signed the executive order that brought the Peace Corps into existence. And then on March 21st, 1961 was when Sargent Shriver was appointed as the first director of the Peace Corps. As you saw in the invitation, this event is a collaboration between the Sargent Shriver Peace Institute and Inside Collaborations International. And it's a fitting collaboration given how complementary the two organizations are and how they've influenced and informed each other over time. And so, in fact, I'm going to introduce the two organizations now so that if you're new to one or the other, you'll know a little bit more about them. So Inside Collaborations International is a member-supported organization looking to further the insight method and expand the use of insight in peace building, mediation, conflict resolution, and problem solving. We're a platform for practitioners to share their work with other members in the form of events, learning series, and the annual Insight Summit, which happens every September. Inside Collaborations International is launching a credentialed standard for the Insight approach for mediation and conflict resolution. And you're all invited to be a part of the inaugural training for that at our 2024 summit. And the Sargent Shriver Peace Institute is dedicated to the study of Sargent Shriver's approach to leadership, peace building, and creative problem solving. We provide research, training, and education for those who wish to think, organize, engage, and strategize using Sargent Shriver's example. So the book we're going to discuss today, The Call, The Spiritual Realism of Sargent Shriver, explores the role of the spirit in the life and work of Sargent Shriver. It presents examples from Shriver's life that illustrate how the spiritual values of compassion and service can be applied to the secular structures of public affairs without the divisive, polarizing effects of leading with particular religious doctrines or traditions. It's a great read for anyone interested in Sargent Shriver's life and work, but also for leaders, innovators, and peace builders of all sorts who are seeking to address contemporary challenges to human dignity and to security. And now I'll introduce our panel. I'm very excited about this pairing of Jamie and Judith because they both knew Sargent Shriver. Judith in the early days with the Peace Corps, and Jamie in Sargent Shriver's later years when he was with Special Olympics. Jamie Price is the founding director of the Sargent Shriver Peace Institute, and he also has a leadership role in Insight Collaborations International. He's developed the programming, organizational systems, and curriculum for both organizations. Jamie holds several academic posts, including those of research professor and founding director of the Insight Conflict Resolution Program in the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason University, and affiliate professor in the Mediterranean Academy of Diplomatic Studies at the University of Malta. He serves on the board of the Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law and writes articles and essays for a range of scholarly and popular publications. He holds a PhD from the Divinity School of the University of Chicago, and Jamie's previous book, Spiritualizing Politics Without Politicizing Religion, The Example of Sargent Shriver, co-authored with Ken Melchin, who's joining us here today, also explores Sargent Shriver's leadership, specifically related to navigating the clash between religion and politics and the polarization that results from the two. Judith Guskin had a central role in the creation of the Peace Corps, working with Sargent Shriver directly to set up the organization in Washington, D.C., and serving as a volunteer in Thailand. During the War on Poverty, under Sargent Shriver, she set up 13 training centers for volunteers in service to America, or VISTA, which continues today, and it's known as AmeriCorps VISTA. She worked for many years as a consultant to schools, implementing bilingual education, as well as programs aimed at integrating Southeast Asian newcomers, and developed training for principals and teachers, and produced documentary films for state departments of education, as well as for the Peace Corps and childhood cancer. She's been a professor at Clark University, the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Teachers College Columbia University, Antioch University, Lehman College, that's part of the City University of New York, and Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok, Thailand. While at Clark University, her research on the history of New England and Native American culture inspired her to write a novel, Longing to Be Free, The Bear, the Eagle, and the Crown. Judith holds an MA in Comparative Literature from the University of Michigan and a PhD in Educational Psychology with an emphasis on history, anthropology, linguistics, and cultural diversity. And I just also want to give a shout out to Nora, who introduced the event from Insight Collaborations International. She's been the behind-the-scenes mastermind behind the events, and I really extend my gratitude to her. And just a final few words of introduction, a few words about the format we'll be following. We're going to balance out our conversation with some short readings from the book, from the call. Since the book is written as a dialogue, we believe, and we hope that you'll agree, that we can derive a lot of value from hearing it out loud. And so we're going to have some introductory questions, and then a short reading, then more conversation, a second reading, conversation, and then Q&A, and then we'll wrap up. And feel free to add questions and comments in the chat as we go. I just want to caution you that because I'm on my phone, I personally cannot see the comments so well. So we'll just rely on Nora to manage the chat, and off we go. So I want to turn to the panel for some opening introductory questions. And the first question is for Jamie. And just simply, I would love to hear about what led you to the idea for this particular book with this specific format. What was important to you about the spiritual call, and how did you land on the dialogue format?
Thanks very much, Lucy.
Those are good, large questions. Let me start with the last one. I think I'd been wanting to write a book for sometimes the culmination of the work that I've been doing at the Sargent Shriver Peace Institute on Sarge's spiritual idealism, his practical spirituality. And I was at a table read of a play that my wife, Diev, was developing. She uses the insight approach to develop theater and to try to get at the interiority of her characters. And it occurred to me as I was at that, she's sort of the pioneer on that in drama. And it occurred to me as I was at that table read that it would be a good model for the book I wanted to write on Sarge. And so I scrapped the sort of traditional analytical approach I was struggling with and shifted to this. And the reason I did was because I wanted to get at the conscious data in Sarge's mind. What was he thinking? What were when he was building the Peace Corps, when he was running the war on poverty, things like that. And how could we talk about that in a way that made sense and helped other people do likewise? And it occurred to me that if I could present him thinking with somebody aloud on paper or in our minds on paper, it might be a good communicative approach. So I went at it that way. And hopefully that works. It was fun to write.
And what was important to you about this spiritual call, the notion of making this spiritual call the center of the book? Well,
as you noted, it was on two levels, I suppose. I did my doctoral work at the Divinity School at the University of Chicago. So I was originally trained as a theologian, and I did my dissertation on a 11th century, or 14th century mystic called Simeon the New Theologian. And I was interested in him because he spoke as clearly as any mystic I'd ever read about his cognitional theory. What was he doing when he was thinking mystically? And I'd been interested from an early age in what the spiritual dimension of life is. I was convinced it was there, and I was struck by the fact that we didn't have good ways to talk about it. And so secularism always was curious to me because it seemed to exclude that. And then when I was hired to help run the Sargent Shriver Peace Institute, I was kind of challenged with the task of explaining how Sarge drew on his own spiritual approach to life to create the programs he did, the war on the Peace Corps in particular. And so I've been thinking about it in that way. My own interests, I suppose that's part of the reason that led me to that job, but my own interests came together in my work with the Peace Institute, my work at George Mason at the University of Chicago at the time. And this book was kind of the culmination of that work, was that thinking.
That's great. It strikes me that everything you've said, including the idea that came from theater, from hearing a reading, it's all very Shriver-esque to me. It strikes me as just pulling great ideas from wherever they might come to produce something. It just feels very sort of holistic and, full-hearted, I would say, which I think does remind me of Sargent Shriver. So
that's probably
great.
One of the best compliments I've ever received. Thank you very much. He's a lot bigger thinker and full-hearted man than I'll ever be, but he's quite amazing. He's a classic.
As are you, and as is Judy. So let me now turn to her and ask her just for an introduction. How did you meet Sargent Shriver, Judy, and what were your impressions of him as you got to know him?
I first want to say that I think he would have loved your book. Okay. He never left me and my heart. Okay. I knew him when we were both struggling, learning to build a boat, as he would call it, or take a parachute jump and build something new. I felt him. I heard him when I read your book. So I just want to say that it was a pleasure. There were times when I just chuckled, and I think he would have chuckled there too. Okay. I first met him at the culmination, I would say, of what happened at October 14th when JFK challenged me to change my life, gave me aspirations that were beyond my believing, that I was needed urgently somewhere in the world. That was a shock. I was getting my doctorate in world literature, and I waited till 2 a.m. to hear him speak. But it was a very personal thing. He opened his heart to us. And now I think I understand better than I ever did why. And I will get to that later. But I met Sarge when we had planned a conference in American University. 400 campuses came. And it was a really amazing event, full off with the students in Washington and elsewhere around the country. At that time, we didn't know that the Peace Corps was going to be made to exist by executive order. So it was very soon after Sarge had just been appointed. I believe it was the first time he spoke any group of potential Peace Corps people. Because I was one of the people organizing the conference, I was given the honor to sit next to Sarge and to introduce him. And it was exciting. I can't say how exciting. I'm still excited when I think about it. And then he turned to me in humility, which, by the way, I think was the real hallmark of the man in many ways. And he said, "Judy, how did I do? Was I okay?" And I assured him that the students were responding to him. So that's the very first time that I met him. It was afterwards that I had the opportunity and the great pleasure of becoming maybe the third person hired in the selection division that summer in the basement of a hotel to work on the Peace Corps, Nick Hobbs and Joe Coleman. And they knew what the students at the University of Michigan and the faculty had done. We had given a plan too. And he showed me the plan when I got there. So I didn't see Sarge as much as Harris Wofford, who was a dear friend of mine throughout my life, or Bill Josephson, but he was there. His spirit was clearly there, pushing us to move fast. We were up till 1 a.m. working, and he got us doing it with pleasure and excitement.
That's huge. I mean, it's very exciting, but it strikes me, correct me if I'm wrong, as something quite daunting, right? So as I understand it, you were suddenly thrust into this leadership role for an institution that didn't exist yet. What was that like for you? What came up for you as you were going through all of this?
It was, you know what? One of the most exciting things was the people that Sarge pulled together. And I learned from him. I can't even tell you how much I learned from him throughout my life. But he pulled together Father Hesburgh at Notre Dame, who was a friend of his.
Yes,
and he pulled together the NGOs. The head of the Experiment in International Living Voice was there. Africa Corps. It wasn't Africa Corps. It was another name, but the Africa program that had been a small program. He pulled together a lot of people. And we were planning a test, and we had a Peace Corps test for a number of years. And I went to Notre Dame. Okay, at that time, I don't even think I knew that Harris Wofford had worked with Father Hesburgh. I met Father Hesburgh on the Civil Rights Commission. They were with one piece. They were together. And I went there. I was very young to administer a test to, I would say, maybe 80 people in the room at Notre Dame. And to see the excitement that had been sparked in the hearts of so many young people was unbelievable to me. So it was just a really exciting time. And I owe a great debt to so many, to Sarge, of course, and to so many people that I met during that early time. I met Nancy Bowles, who was Bowles' daughter-in-law. We worked together at the Xerox machine. Okay. In other words, the people were unbelievable. They had experience that I had never thought I could have. And it was just a really wonderful and exciting time.
That's fantastic. And so I think now we'll dive into one of the real life experiences from that era by reading the setup for the call from chapter 1 of the book. Basically, what we'll be reading sets up the conversation that unfolds in the entire book, and provides a little bit of background to some of the stories that came later, which Judy has just described. So we're going to be reading from chapter 1 of the book, Sarge Gets the Call. And the character of Didymus, Sargent Shriver's interviewer, has been asking him about a moment shortly after the inauguration of President Kennedy, who was Sargent Shriver's brother-in-law. The Shriver family had attended the inauguration in Washington, D.C., and then they had returned home to Chicago. And typically when one reads at a book reading, one person reads, but in this case, because the entire book is a series of conversations, to make the two voices clearer, I'll be reading the part of Didymus, and Jamie is going to be reading the part of Sargent Shriver. So Jamie, are you ready?
All ready.
Okay, so we'll start with Didymus. So there you are. It's Sunday, January 21st, the day after the inauguration, and you're feeling glad to be back home. You have high-level aspirations and opportunities you want to pursue, and when the phone rings, you're reluctant to take the president's call.
I didn't want to be sidetracked.
You'd done your bit for your family. You had just dedicated 9 months to electing and staffing the new president.
That's right. Besides, the prospect of becoming a federal bureaucrat running the Peace Corps out of some division buried in the State Department held absolutely no allure for me.
But as it happened, Eunice hands you the phone, you speak to the president, and 2 minutes later, you're saying goodbye to Chicago and everything you were hoping to achieve, either in public office or as the president of the Catholic Interracial Council. Instead, you're saying yes to heading up the Peace Corps task force.
That's right.
That's astonishing, is what it is.
I guess it is. It certainly wasn't my plan when we touched down in Chicago that morning.
So what changed your mind?
Well, for one thing, Eunice was right. Jack was the president, and as you can well imagine, it's very difficult to say no to the president, especially if he's your brother-in-law, and you admire him, and you're keenly aware that your wife, his sister, would much rather be in the thick of things in D.C. than in Chicago.
But
when I picked up the phone, I was fully prepared to say no.
Yet you didn't.
No, I didn't. When the president offered me the role of leading a task force charged with designing the Peace Corps, I felt called to let go of my other plans and to say yes to the challenge.
What do you mean you felt called?
I mean, I felt spiritually called.
Spiritually?
Yes.
That's surprising.
It always is.
Let me make sure I understand. You're saying that during your phone call with the president, and more specifically, when you heard him ask you to lead the task force, you experienced some sort of spiritual call.
I am. And it wasn't some sort of spiritual call. It was an actual spiritual call. And I have Mary to thank for it.
Mary? What does Mary have to do with it?
Well, to my mind, Mary is Our Lady of Spiritual Awareness. For me, she's the perfect image of spiritual openness.
She's an exemplar for you.
When the angel Gabriel appears to her in the first chapter of Luke, he announces that God has chosen her to be the vessel of his entry into the world, the physical vessel. Needless to say, this was surprising to her, and it had to be puzzling and troubling on any number of levels, too.
Had to be.
But here's the thing. Mary remains centered in the face of her encounter with Gabriel. She maintains her equanimity. She doesn't turn away from Gabriel or shut him out. She doesn't resist the role she's been selected to play. If she's doubtful and afraid, there's no record of it. She's let that go. Her reply to Gabriel is extraordinary. Be it done to me according to thy word.
What does she mean by that?
You can't be more open to grace, more consciously present to the Spirit than Mary was at that particular moment.
Consciously present?
It's another way of saying explicitly aware of, though I think it's more accurate.
So you're saying that in the manner of Mary, you were consciously present to the Spirit in your conversation with the president.
As we've discussed, I had plenty of good reasons to stay in Chicago, to get on with my life, and plenty of good reasons to reject the idea of going back to DC.
But you remained open to new possibilities. How so?
When I pray the rosary, and I pray the rosary every day, I pray the words Mary spoke to Gabriel. I ask for her help in being more like her. She's present to me in her words.
In the midst of your conversation with the president?
Sorry.
So your daily practice of saying...
Yeah, right. I lost my page. Yes, that's right.
So did I. So your daily practice of saying the rosary, of praying to Mary, prepared you to be present to a spiritual call in your phone call with the president.
That's right.
It seems we've come a long way from the phone call in your apartment overlooking Lake Michigan.
Not that far, really.
None of the other histories of the Peace Corps point to the spiritual experience as a key factor in your decision to head up the Peace Corps.
Then it's a good thing we're having this conversation.
You think so?
I do, though I realize there's risk involved.
How so?
I've been using devotional language to talk to you about my phone call with the president. Of course, that's fine with me, and that's where your questions carried my mind. But I know that talking this way has its risks, communicatively.
What risks?
The risk that people will leap to conclusions, false conclusions.
What conclusions?
That I'm either being uncritical or doctrinaire, maybe both.
I wasn't thinking about you that way.
Not everyone would, of course.
But some people perhaps. And that concerns you.
It does.
So help me to understand. As soon as these people hear you report that you felt spiritually called to lead the Peace Corps task force, you're worried they will leap to what conclusion?
The conclusion that I'm not being realistic. That my spiritual convictions have led me to surrender the critical use of my mind. That by claiming I was consciously present to the Spirit in my conversation with the president, I surrendered any claim I might have to be taken seriously as an evidence-based thinker.
Because
they're convinced that whatever happened during my phone call with the president, it's best understood in explicitly secular sensory terms, not in religious or spiritual terms.
But for you, it's best understood that way.
It's best understood that way.
It's not
yes.
best understood that way. I apologize.
No.
And you're concerned that because you discuss your experience in devotional terms, people will refuse to take you seriously.
That's right. My other concern is that my references to Mary and the Spirit could come across as sectarian, doctrinaire, exclusive.
As some sort of privileged speech.
As conversation stoppers in their own right.
But that's not how you think of it.
I think of it as true, as right, but I also recognize that my devotional language is my brand of spiritual common sense. It's personal to me, of course, because I'm the one seeking spiritual openness, and it's culturally and religiously particular in the sense that it's guided and shaped by the worshiping community to which I belong. And frankly, I don't think anyone gets through the day without some form of spiritual common sense, some form of practical wisdom, whatever language they use, whatever cultural traditions that inform them.
And as a result, you don't consider yourself doctrinaire.
I'm spiritual, I'm devout, but I'm not sectarian or doctrinaire. I'm Catholic. I go to Mass every morning. I say the Rosary and I pray to Mary every day, but I'm not narrow or exclusive about it. I think my way of being devout is a good way, a self-transcending way, but it's not the only way.
And that's the end of the passage. The spiritual call. I'm just going to turn to Judy for a second as a reader of the call. So Judy, you just picked up the book and started reading. Given that you had a similar call, you had just like Sargent Shriver did by the same person, by John Kennedy. When you read the call, how did this notion of the spiritual call strike you as a reader, particularly given that you had received a call yourself by the same person?
Well, I am not Catholic, but I knew and felt Sarge's spiritual nature because he was our, I don't know how to say it, cheerleader, our shaper of our spirit. Whatever spark we had, because he knew that you had to erase some barriers that we have between everyone, whether it's race, whether it's caste, whether it's culture. And only some kind of spiritual nature would be able to do that. And the Peace Corps volunteers particularly had to have an approach that was dealing with openness, humility, respect for others, partnerships. Those were the things that he needed us to be if he was to succeed. Okay. He needed us to perform our tasks in a certain way. And if we didn't perform it in the right way, if we were arrogant, if we were seen as diplomats or spies, if we were not learning as we went, if we were not open to the hearts of people, then we would fail. So I actually documented in documentaries Shriver's speeches during those early years. I was given that privilege. And so I had on record, and I was sitting next to Maria, I remember this, Maria Shriver, and he said, serve, serve, serve. You know, that is what is most important. That wasn't new. Break your mirrors. That wasn't new. He had his way of repackaging, if you will, his own spirituality to reach younger people in their 20s or 30s and to shape them, shape us by his spiritual reality, what he saw. And I found, I'm going to say just one thing more. I found in a book that Martin Viors wrote, a little book, the 25th anniversary. I had met him around the time I met Shriver at first, and he wrote an article that we were trying to get JFK to start the Peace Corps. I went to get my senator on board, etc. And then I met him again right around the 25th, and he asked me if he could write a book about the 25th. Would that be a good thing, and would people want it, and would I help? And I said, of course. All right. In the book, there's a few pages where Sarge says, my vision. And I picked it up this week. And he talks about how it was like he felt when he got that call, like it was a parachute jump. It was scary, okay?
Yeah, yes.
And he thought that maybe Peace Corps could be a way station along the road to peace. And maybe that's what he had to do. And he said that what changes the world, the ask not, he mentions, the inaugural speech. But then he said, what changes the world are ideas' power, as well as spiritual power. And the ideas, which I get it, were that the world was changing, and the American democracy and its ideas and ideals were important for peace. And I have today, actually, a greater understanding of how that fits with Kennedy's mind, as well as with Shriver's mind. Every day I learn something more, okay? So I just want to say that the book really did capture who he was. And I want to add, the part that I experienced was how he inspired us all and inspired millions of people, Thais and Nigerians and people all over the world. Because compassion, when it's really felt, that's what changes.
Yeah. And I think this is something that the book does beautifully, right? Jamie talks about self-transcendence, and by transcending yourself, as you know, as you're describing about Sargent Shriver, we have the ability to reach more and more people, as you saw firsthand. And we really can have the power together to make peace around the world. It's a huge aspiration, but if we believe it and we live it, we can achieve it. That's what he believed, and that's what comes out beautifully in what you're saying, in the way you saw it unfold, and in the way Jamie wrote the book. So Jamie, let me ask you, this conversation that we just heard was an actual conversation, based on an actual conversation that you had with Sargent Shriver about that era. Can you tell us a little bit more about that conversation and about what struck you and what stayed with you?
Sure. Actually, as a lead up to that, I'd like to respond. I'd like to add something to what Judy just said and you just said. Sarge was tremendously aware, or explicitly aware, pretty much all the time, of the spiritual dimension of things, and he did call for self-transcendence. What I think was brilliant about what he did was that he knew that it wasn't enough to just say, transcend yourself, or, you have the power, go get it, guys and gals. He knew how to build an organization that inspired people to move toward that, like the Peace Corps, and constructed it in such a way that it would bring that yearning out. So, I mean, he would, in a lot of his speeches, he talked about how the rules of Peace Corps were few and simple. And if you think about it, what Peace Corps volunteers had to do was learn another language, enter the culture in its own terms, not their own, take themselves, live at basically the same standard of living. And he also said, prepare to suffer, prepare to be uncomfortable, and take seriously the notion of peace and nation building. And so if you're committed to that, he put Peace Corps volunteers in a position where then if you learn the other language and you offer yourself to serve, you're in a way transcending your own particular concerns, your own particular frame of reference, and opening yourself to have the spirit move you in those directions. And he and I, to get to the conversation, and I mean, so part of what I explore in the book, and part of what I think we need more of today, is building organizations and that actually account for that rather than not. I mean, if you do believe that there's not only a sensory material part to life and a conscious, intentional part to the people in it, but also that there's a spiritual tug, which Sarge thought, to transcend and make peace and to connect, that has to be built into the structure of how you plan things. And that's what was amazing about what he did. And we were talking about that kind of stuff at his office. We talked about it a lot over the last years of his life. I had the opportunity to have many conversations. They were always intense. He was always, as Judy was saying earlier, he was always really curious. He was never self-referenced, really. He was always asking the equivalent of, how did I do? Or what did you think? Or where would you go with this? Or what would you add? Or, that kind of, he was always extraordinarily curious. And I was asking him I was just learning about the history of his being chosen by Kennedy to lead that task force. And I was struck by the fact that he'd gone back to Chicago, and it was on the very day he went back that he was called, and that he made the decision to go back. And I just asked him about it, and he was saying, well, yeah, that was a tough decision. And I think he didn't, in my conversation with him, talk about the metaphor of the parachute, but I think he felt something like that. He was set up in Illinois to make a run for governor or for senator. He was going to he had plenty of opportunities for the public life. He was engaged in peace building in the schools and in civil rights in Chicago, and he loved all that work. He loved Chicago as a city, but he turned on a dime when he felt a higher calling that he didn't know what it would be. He just knew that the Peace Corps was something that he had an opportunity to design, and it was something that he felt right in that phone call that he needed to do. And it was totally believable to me based on who he was, but I was curious about exactly how that happened for him, how he was able to do that, and how then he said, well, Peace Corps volunteers do that all the time, and I wanted to know how he knew that and what he was paying attention to and how he could see it. So I began to think about those things, and the result was the book.
Well, I want to pick up on some of the threads that you just wove through your answer, and Judy as well, related to, saying, well, it's easy to say, what Peace Corps volunteers do and how we can create peace all around the world, one person at a time. That's all easy to say. But when I think about some of the things that you said, Jamie and Judy as well, the parachute jump, the fact that it was scary, the fact that Peace Corps volunteers do that all the time. I think about sort of the fear and the risk that's involved when you are spiritually called to do something that is so big. And this question is for both of you, really, and your different experiences of Sargent Shriver. What did he teach us about dealing with fear and risk when answering a call, when deciding, but to use an inside term, right? When it comes to deliberating and then deciding, well, what am I going to do? I've been called to do this. I've been called to start this organization. What did he teach us about dealing with that fear and that risk? How can we be more spiritually adventurous based on what we learned?
I'm just going to add a quick thing. Listen. Open your heart, open your mind, listen. Okay? And part of your other hat, dealing with conflict resolution, deals with listening to people. Are they feeling threatened? What do they fear? Okay? If you don't listen, you don't have a good relationship. And it's all in the relationship. So I think he told us that we have to know the different points of view. If you're a leader, let's say I worked with schools, we had to listen to the parents of the new refugees. I did several films, and I interviewed the parents. What did they feel? What were their aspirations? So I think the very thing that he taught us was you can't solve conflicts and you can't deal with your own fears only. You have to know what's at stake for everyone in a situation, and that you only can know that if you want to try, you really try to know. So I think that is a very important thing in leadership.
That's great. So listening and
of course,
keeping in mind. Yes, Jamie, go ahead.
No, sorry. And of course, to say just listen is, I mean, Judy's absolutely right about Sarge's emphasis, but he also knew, and coming out of that conversation with him and other conversations, that it's one thing to say listen and another thing to do it. That you need models, and you need what I think of as, carriers of your curiosity. We spontaneously think we already know. We spontaneously feel that our assessment of what's going on, who a person is, what they're thinking is already decided, and we don't ask the further relevant question. And so I think that was the importance of him bringing up Mary in that conversation. He knew it wasn't just open yourself to the Spirit. He needed a model to sort of hitch his wagon to, so he figured that if she could face down this incredibly amazing call to mediate the divine in the world, that he could too. And he just had to remember her, that that's what she did, and that she let go of her fears, that it was that she didn't have them, but she didn't orient herself that way. And I think he would say that after a period of time, it becomes, yes, there's risk. You're walking in unknowns when you listen deeply to what's being asked of you. Particularly, what's being asked of you is to follow and pursue your highest aspirations, and you don't know what that looks like. Not sure what that is, and you have to be comfortable with not knowing. It's the parachute jump that Judy mentioned. You have to, and after a while, your moment of discernment becomes that you don't know, and that becomes more of a clue than
I saw him suffer. I saw him suffer when he had to do the war on poverty and make hard decisions.
Yes.
And he was afraid. I mean, he was so afraid that Peace Corps would be hurt. He was afraid that because of the conflicts of civil rights in the community, that the whole community action thing wasn't going to work. You know, he took a risk on job care. He took a risk on even Head Start was a risk. Who knew how many people would want that kind of thing? So, you know, but he had to make hard decisions. Okay. And I remember those. He was protective of us. One thing I'll tell you is that he was so frightened that he called me in one day and told me to drop everything I was doing and come to his office and sit there for the rest of the day. He didn't care how long, and read a script for a movie. And I thought that was weird. And the movie was Volunteers with Tom Hanks and John Candy. Probably he saw me, and the movie took place in Thailand, and maybe that's why he told me to do it. But he was so afraid that that one or two things go wrong, either in the Peace Corps or later on in terms of VISTA or later on. And there were things, there were interracial relationships that were sensitive. Okay. He had to fire some people who were big during those days too. And he was in pain over that. I mean, I know of one particular case, so I saw he would go there. He believed in what he was doing deeply. He believed, no matter how controversial the problems were in the urban area for certain programs, that they ought to be there. Okay. And he had the guts to keep at it, even as he saw the money dwindling away because of the Vietnam War.
Right.
It was very painful. It was very painful. Nobody says decisions that you make are easy, and he had to make a lot of them that were not easy. And what did I learn? Don't give up. Go out there.
Yeah.
Try again a different way. That's another learning I got.
Tried a different way, yes. And I think the fact that Judy is bringing up the war on poverty and perhaps the difference between the Peace Corps and the war on poverty is really important. Jamie's done work on this elsewhere, because with the war on poverty, he had to deal with something that he didn't have to deal with the Peace Corps, which is our own politics, right? American politics, which were really quite polarized at the time. Judy mentioned interracial issues, right? This was the civil rights era. And I think that must have been quite daunting for him. And it's a great example, series of examples, the war on poverty and what was difficult about it. And obviously Vietnam as well, which took funds away and attention away, the president's attention away from the work that he was dedicated to doing. Thank you so much. That was from both of you. That was all very insightful and fascinating. I want to turn now to the second reading, which actually is the part of the book that involves Judy's example directly. So it's in the final chapter of the book. It's called Peace Corps, Blessed Are the Peacemakers. Throughout the conversations, throughout the book, Sargent Shriver has given many examples from his own life and the lives of others related to what it means to be spiritually called and how we can stay mindful and compassionate as we decide how to respond to that call. He now gives Didymus his final example. It's the example that ends the book from the life of Judy and her partner, Alan Guskin's life. So Judy and Alan's story is quite famous in Peace Corps history. In fact, we've touched on it in different ways, but just to summarize really quickly, during his presidential campaign, so before he became president, then Senator John Kennedy arrived very late at a campaign stop at the University of Michigan, where Judy was a student. It was 2:00 in the morning, and the campaign had planned to go to sleep. But there were 10,000 students waiting for him to speak, and Judy was there among them. And so Kennedy decided to speak, and his impromptu remarks included the notion of a bold new experiment in public service. He launched a challenge, or perhaps a call, we might want to use the word call, to them, asking, quote, how many of you are going to be doctors, are willing to spend your days in Ghana? Technicians or engineers, how many of you are willing to work in foreign service and spend your lives traveling around the world, end quote. And I'm sure that Judy can tell us more about this moment during the conversation that will follow. But for now, we'll read for a few minutes from the book. And once again, I'm going to read the part of Didymus, and Jamie will be reading Sargent Shriver's role.
And let me just say, if I may,
Please.
as a further setup to this, that over the course of the book, between conversation 1 and now conversation 9, Didymus has learned, because he's been curious about it, how Sarge does what he does and how he thinks, and the roles have shifted. So whereas in the first reading, Didymus was the curious one and Sarge had the answers, now Sarge has pivoted that, and he's taken on the role of the curious, wanting to know what Didymus has learned and what he's appropriated. And so it's been a switch. And I suppose as author, my hope is that that's what happens for most readers, that move from wondering about Sarge to being able to think the way he did by the end of this conversation. Anyway, start with, so let's review the evidence from that group of students.
What evidence do you have in mind?
Judith and Alan Guskin left us a significant data set.
The Guskins, they led the student mobilization effort at Michigan.
Right. They launched the pledge drive for student signatures that prompted Jack to propose the creation of the Peace Corps in his Cow Palace speech.
Okay, we know some of the actions they took, some decisions that they made. Eyewitness News would have picked them up if they'd been on the scene, but if we want to understand the conscious and spiritual components of their response to Senator Kennedy, we need more data.
And for that data, we can turn to the letter they wrote to the editor of the Michigan Daily following Jack's visit.
That letter would enable us to differentiate the conscious and spiritual components of their response to Senator Kennedy?
Yes. You were using your mind when you responded to my questions in the role play. Judith and Alan were using their minds when they were writing their letter.
Let me see if I've got it. You're thinking the letter they wrote to the Michigan Daily is on the order of my verbal responses to your questions.
To the degree it reveals how they were using their minds, yes.
Okay, so let's find out. Do you have a copy of the letter?
It's even shorter than Jack's remarks to the students that night. It's only a few sentences long.
Did they write it that night?
No, it took them a few days. They composed the letter on October 18th, 4 days after Jack's visit.
Sorry, my internet.
Do we know what?
I apologize. My internet just went out for a second. Okay.
No, it took them a few days. They've composed their letter on October 18th, 4 days after Jack's visit.
Do we know what prompted their decision?
The broader context, yes. On the 18th, they decided to attend another campaign event for Senator Kennedy, this time featuring Congressman Chester Bowles.
The senator's candidacy was obviously on their minds.
And on the minds of other students, too. In the Q&A afterward, a fellow student raised the question of Senator Kennedy's challenge and asked the congressman what he thought about it. Bowles affirmed the idea and validated the contributions the students could make to world peace.
His affirmation would have made it more real for them.
Something definitely clicked, because right after the Bowles event, Judith and Alan drafted their letter to the editor on a napkin in a restaurant near campus. And 3 days later, on October 21st, the Michigan Daily ran their letter on the front page.
So exactly 1 week after the senator's visit to the campus, the letter is published. It should tell us about the conscious and spiritual components of the Guskins' response.
Yes, let's take it sentence by sentence. Here's the first sentence of the letter. Tell me what you notice. Representative Chester Bowles and Senator Kennedy in their speeches to the students of the University of Michigan both emphasized that disarmament and peace lie to a very great extent in our hands, and requested our participation throughout the world as necessary for the realization of these goals.
What do I notice?
Right. Think with the model.
You want me to pin down the key terms?
Yes. What do you notice first about the way they're using their minds?
Well, the main thing I notice is that Judith and Alan have picked up the mantle of Senator Kennedy's challenge. It strikes me that they've internalized the narrative image that Senator Kennedy was testing on the Michigan students when he asked for their service.
What makes you say that?
Well, I was wondering about the narrative image carrying the Guskins' performance. So the question I asked was, who are the Guskins imagining themselves to be as they sit down to write the letter?
And
And they're thinking of themselves as persons with the capacity to advance peace and freedom around the world. As they put it, disarmament and peace lie to a very great extent in our hands.
yes, that's it. They find themselves reflected by it in Bowles and Kennedy's remarks.
They're certainly more confident in the embrace of the narrative image than I was in my role play.
You were intrigued. They're bold. Their aspirations open out beyond the horizon of a traditional college student.
I can imagine wanting to write a term paper on disarmament and peace for a public policy or conflict resolution class, but that's clearly not what's going on here.
Let's see what's going on. Sentence 2. In reply to this urgent request, we both hereby state that we would devote a number of years to work in countries where our help is needed, either through the United Nations or through the United States Foreign Service.
They've decided to commit, and they're using the letter to formally announce their decision. That's the main thing I notice here.
Yes, Jack wondered who might be willing to spend a number of years in service to Ghana and post-colonial Africa. Here's his answer.
They don't mention the Peace Corps.
No, but then neither did Jack. He referenced the Foreign Service, and so do they. His first public use of the term is still a week away in his Cow Palace speech when he announces his decision to create the Peace Corps.
In any case, Judith and Alan don't seem overly concerned about the institutional context for their commitment. It could be the Foreign Service, it could be the United Nations, whatever's best.
Right. To me, the point here is that their sails are full.
This is the spiritual component.
Yes.
There are signs of self-transcendence in the Guskins' decision-making.
Go on.
They say they're willing to serve as necessary, where their help is needed, and in whatever institutional setup is appropriate.
They're not focusing on their personal concerns or preferences.
No.
Beyond that, the wording they use, their expression of willingness to serve as necessary, where their help is needed, reflects an openness that reminds me of Mary.
Be it done to me according to thy word.
Yes.
Okay, but how much can you actually make of that?
I'm not trying to make anything of it. When self-transcendence is manifest, you can expect to find signs of the Spirit. So I'm just saying the Spirit is at play here. Devotion to Mary is where I go with it.
You're saying there's a spiritual component to the letter, but not a specifically religious one.
That's how I read it, yes.
And where did the Guskins go with it? And this is also from the letter. We would also like to request that all students who feel they would like to help the cause of world peace by direct participation send a letter to this paper and or our address. These letters will be forwarded to Kennedy and Bowles as an answer to the students of the University of Michigan to their plea for help. So they're introducing an action component to the letter.
Several of them, actually, but let's not skip over the conscious component of those action steps.
What are you noticing?
Notice the way the Guskins are focusing their attention, what they're concerned about.
They're appealing to all students who feel that they would like to help the cause of world peace.
And they want to solicit letters of commitment from them.
We're getting at their role and horizon of concern, aren't we?
We are.
They've taken on the role of student organizers.
And where do you think they got this role?
I assume they came up with it in response to the Bowles event. Maybe they just recognized a job that needed to be done, a gap that needed to be filled, and decided to step forward.
That's often how these things happen.
But it's a big step forward. You think they were called to take it, don't you?
The Spirit is an active principle of aspiration and commitment. So yes.
Whether they were explicitly aware of it or not?
You know, we can't answer that question for them.
Yes, but I'm struck by the Guskins' expectation that they are not alone in their response to the senator's challenge, that other students would be willing to make the same commitment they have.
Do we go
Ooh.
on?
Right, but notice the difference.
But notice the difference. The other students are not responding directly to the senator's challenge, not the way the Guskins are,
They're responding to the Guskins letter, aren't they?
not to the senator's presence, right?
Those other students are responding to the startling news that disarmament and world peace lies to a great extent in their hands.
And
And
to
that's
the
the end
equally
of the read.
and to the equally startling invitation to join with the Guskins in committing to serve abroad. Right.
Great.
Wow.
But
I
what
when
actions
I
response?
realized that was the way you were going to end your book, I laughed and I cried. I was overwhelmed. I was excited, and to this day, today, I still am exploring in my heart and mind how my life changed and why it changed and what did I understand at that time and what didn't I understand. Okay, and how it shaped my whole life. What I want to say first is that 25,000 letters was sent. They were given to Bowles and Dick Goodwin to take care of. Okay, those letters were, in addition to the petition of a 1,000 students in Michigan, those letters were significant. Kennedy knew they were there. They were in his White House.
Wow.
He knew they were there. What did it say to him? And I'm looking into his mind today, as well as my own. He said, maybe this is possible. Maybe this really could happen. Maybe these people would come. Okay. Now, why did we respond that way? I have a new take on this, and I really want to share with people. It wasn't a speech, it was a heart to heart. Kennedy, nobody knew why he brought it up the way he did, and nobody really understood why was he talking about Africa. I think I know. Okay. He was the chair of the subcommittee of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in the 50s, 57, for Africa. He was deeply involved with the young people who were revolutionaries looking to America and America's ideals in order to get rid of colonialism and build a new world. This was 1/3 of the world's people. Okay. Kennedy had them in his heart. He paid their travel expenses when they couldn't afford to come and take scholarships that they were given. Okay. There may have been African students, because we had them in Ann Arbor, right in front of him as well, who were part of the international studies. He knew that it was an international university in Ann Arbor. And because he said something outrageous, that he was thinking that this is urgent and that we needed to get on board to save democracy, believe it or not. I was touched, overwhelmed, never thought of myself that way. Okay, so that's my transcendence. I never thought that I could do anything for peace on a big way like that. And the other people too, I think, were there, and they felt his heart. Now, what did he do? He also wanted this to be the cornerstone of his redo of foreign affairs and foreign, particularly to Africa. He wanted to show that the American ideals revolution could be real. Okay. Sarge mentioned this, saw this. People in Africa were naming their kids Abraham Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
Duh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there was something going on in Africa among these people. And Kennedy wanted to capture that, build on that, and build a new kind of grassroots aid program. Within the context of the Cold War, he was tired of talking about war with Russia and China after that third debate. So here I feel he felt I'm going to do something for peace, damn it. And these kids can help me. Okay. And maybe that's what we felt. Kennedy invited 11 African diplomats to meet his family in the White House during those first 4 years. What does that tell me? You have to see what ideas inspire people, and you have to build trust. You have to build trust. And he did get the trust of these African leaders, okay? And when Sarge went around with Paris to all these countries, there was receptivity. And Sarge remembered also in this vision that he did 25 years afterwards, that a woman who had been in India and who met Gandhi challenged him at one point. Do you think young Americans possess the spiritual values they must have?
Yes.
Bring the spirit of your resolution and our, our own ideas, our democracy to our country? And the answer Sarge gave and Kennedy gave was yes. Americans can be idealistic. They do have the spirit. They do know how to have a good, friendly relationship with people and listen to people, and that's what I am left with today, in a almost tearful way, of the beauty of it.
It is beautiful.
You got to build trust, and you do it with love. And where does love come from? Well, maybe it comes from Mary in your heart. Maybe it comes from a mystic. Maybe it comes from your mom and dad who shaped me through the Depression. Maybe it came from my neighbors who were Holocaust survivors. My parents worked in a hospital. Maybe it comes from their profession. Wherever that spirit can come from, it's important. And you gave me insight into the spirit and into how it affected Sarge. And I am grateful, very grateful for that book. I think everybody should read it because it's a wonderful read. It's a wonderful read. It's charming as well as informative. So that's what I'm going to end with.
Jamie, what's your response as hearing Judy's words?
Well, I'm grateful. I mean, thank you, Judy. It's lovely to have you say that the book was meaningful and to tell other people to read it too. Sarge deserves that. He was aware that the spirit is present. It isn't a matter of where it comes from so much, but that it's present all the time, here, now, no matter where we are. And so, of course, it would be mediated by your parents or by a mystic or by Mary or by whatever as he put it, spiritual common sense is. And it self-corrects. It pulls us toward who we need and most deeply want to be, which is, and speaking of heart to heart, your heart speaks powerfully to other hearts, Judy. So I'm grateful for that and grateful to be with you today.
Sarge wrote in his biography to me, he wrote, for Judith, he said, your love of people and cultures inspired the piece. Thank you. And I am humbled, but I am so grateful that I had a chance to know him and work with him. It gave so much joy to my life, which came from my work with people in this country, refugees after the Vietnam War, my love and work with the Native Americans who wanted to keep their language, my love and work on desegregation issues. But all of it kind of maybe would not have happened if I had not worked for Sarge. So I am grateful for everyone who helped him. I am grateful that his children, I just want to mention this, I follow Maria, her Sunday paper plus, and I was so happy that she and Jill Biden held hands when they were talking about women's health. I followed Tim when he did the educational work, and I still want to know more about the social, emotional learning and empathy that he has so wonderfully expressed and shared. I met Mark when he wrote his book, The Good Man, in Miami. I am grateful for all of the Peace Corps people that I ever meet in my life, because each one had a unique experience and I can learn something from them. And I'm grateful for you, Lucy, for keeping this legacy alive, for, you know, picking out quotes that are great and then making us make some action. Want to read the whole thing? Go do it. And I do. Not all the time, I must say, but I do it. And I love it. His legacy really deserves attention, and your book can help that happen. So I'm honored to share this with you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I just wanted to, sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to just make note that there's a question in the chat.
Yes.
There's lots of thank yous as well, so that's really nice to see. And the question is from Alyssa or Elisa. And they say, I think a lot about the Insight approach as it relates to the Israel-Hamas conflict and negotiations to free the hostages being held in Gaza or somewhere. I have so many questions about this. Does anyone know if there are professional mediators involved aside from the political players? And can you imagine if there is an Insight mediator?
I don't know that there's an Insight mediator there, specifically somebody who's trained in Insight and in Insight mediation. I don't know if there is or not. Somebody from that community might know better and might have a better example. I do know that despite how awful things are and how hideous it is and how much pain and suffering is going on and how polarized it is and what a dead end we seem to be at, the spirit's there too. I'm sure there are countless acts of love and heart-to-heart heroism that are going on. And it would be nice to hear about some of those from that troubled time and place, if possible.
Yeah, I don't know either about the situation in terms of mediators, but I just want to say one of the things that I'm excited about with Insight Collaborations International is that there is an effort now to do accreditation, right? And more there are formal adoptions of the Insight approach inside organizations for mediation and conflict resolution. So I definitely appreciate and am excited about the movement in that area. And I think that, I think maybe this is one of the areas where we are each called, right, to try to spread the word about Insight and to take a more active role in the organization so we can learn more about it and apply it in our own work because it's definitely needed.
I mean, yeah, the important thing about Insight Collaborations International is that it is attempting to make the Insight approach clear and methodological and usable by people in their professional and personal lives. But we shouldn't forget that what that basically does is it lifts up the role of the mind and the heart in the actions we take. And people have minds and people have hearts and they have good minds and they have good hearts. So even if there isn't explicitly an Insight mediator present in Gaza, there are undoubtedly people with insights, with what we would call Insight skills operating there. There are people who want to understand what's going on. There are people who are curious. There are people who care deeply for the pain and suffering that's being caused. And of course, there are some people who are completely righteous and certain that there's only one way out of this, and it's their way. and that battle we fight all kinds of places. But there are many reasons for hope, I think.
Yes. Okay, Judy or Jamie, any parting words, anything else to add before we close?
I would just say that I'm working now with more perfect John Bridgeland and others, many others, are trying to unite our country now and deal with educating in a action and spiritual way, I hope, for people to move towards policies that are full of more love than hate, full of more openness than closed-mindedness, etc. And so I would recommend that people look at that. And also Tim Shriver has something called Unite.
Yes.
Other people are involved in this crisis that we have now. I believe in hope. Hope is full of pain. Sometimes it's uncertain.
Yeah.
Sometimes, but somehow Sarge injected me with that enduring optimism that keeps my life have a sense of purpose. And so that I've got to keep it going. I'm working now somewhat as a consultant with the Citizens and Scholars group on teaching civics, even though I wasn't a civics teacher. It's a risk. I don't know as much as most people do.
Yeah, risk again.
Take the risk if you have
Yes.
the hope. And maybe, and Sarge knew this, it can de-infection.
Yes.
It could bring along others. So I will never forget, Sarge, and I know that I have more to learn from you, Jamie, about religion, because my grandchild is now, by the way, I should say, going to Chicago as a Jesuit volunteer now that he's graduated college, and he was a religion major. And I told him about this, and so, and I will tell him more. I hope he gets to hear this. So move forward. Keep going.
Move forward.
Don't give up. Engage. And that's my final word.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, Jamie. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no. I was going to say thank you as well. I was just going to say my final word is to thank Judith, your presence and energy and wisdom and heart and hope, and that you were willing to read the book so carefully and to engage in it so deeply and share yourself so fully. It's been a pleasure to be with you. And everybody, all 40 or 40 plus of you who came to this event, I'm so grateful that you're willing to dedicate your time and your hearts and your minds to thinking about these issues. Pay attention to the little book that I wrote, and I wish you all well, and I'm grateful for your presence. That's my last word.
Well, thanks to both of you. I'm very grateful. I had such a great time in this conversation, and thanks to everyone who came and joined and stuck with us until the end. I want to invite you before we go to subscribe to our 2 newsletters if you're not on them already. I'm sure you're at least on one if you made it to this conversation. But in any case, you can go to our 2 websites. They're sargentshriver.org, SARGENTSHRIVER.org. I'm sorry, I'm not typing. I'm on my phone and it's dying. So there's that. And insidecollaborations.org. And just before we go, watch for an invitation hosted by Inside Collaborations International to a reading circle. So we'll be reading the call together in June. So that's going to be coming. And I think Nora has already set up the RSVP for that. So yes, we'll be doing that later this year. don't forget to get your own copy of the call. You can go to your favorite online bookseller or independent bookseller. If smaller bookstores may not have it, so just request it. If there's a particular bookstore that you like to support and you don't see it, and they can order it for you. And if you have any questions about ordering the call, you can just email me. You can find my email address on the sargentshriver.org website. So I want to thank you once again for taking part in this event today, and I wish you joy and good health and peace.
Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you.
There was a question from Jerry. What is the name of the mystic that was mentioned?
Oh, that was Simeon the New Theologian.
Can you spell that?
Simeon, Symeon, the New Theologian, an 11th century Byzantine mystic. Some of his writings have been translated into English. They've been translated into French, if that works for you. And he wrote in Greek.
Great.
Perfect.
Okay. Any
Thanks.
other questions?
Not so far. Maybe we can wait until people sign off and then see if there's anything outstanding. But thanks so much, Lucy, for organizing this and hosting it. And it was seamless.
Yeah, thank you for your patience. I know at one point I realized my phone was dying and I had to walk around. So I know
You
I
did
have to
great.
figure out why I have no internet now.
That's the life. I like the humanity of Zoom. It's very, you have to go with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did a
Bye,
fabulous.
Kim.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
my gratitude to everyone. And by the way, Lucy,
Mhm.
this is Quentin Dunn. I've sent you a couple of emails, over the last few months, just thanking you for all that you do. So it's a real pleasure to see you and hear you.